Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show today. I'm really excited you could join us. So today we're diving into a really important topic with a really cool expert in the field. We're going to talk about employee retention. We're going to be talking about how to retain customers, or retain employees, and how to get the best ones in the door. Now, our special guest with us today has been with us one other time, and the reason he's back with us today is because we had so much great information that we filled up our time last time with a lot of acquisition, how to get a good employee in the door, but we didn't have a lot of time to talk about how to retain them, how to keep them there. So we're still going to talk a little bit more about how to bring them in, but we're going to spend a lot more time on retention today and amongst many other things in his wheelhouse of knowledge. So with us today is Steve Lowiz. Now, Steve has, for the last 20 years, has become a globally recognized entrepreneur, speaker, and educator. And he's no stranger to leading conferences and symposiums to share his insight on entrepreneurial best practices, team management, and individual development strategies. So from day one, Steve made it his mission to disrupt the HR, recruitment, and personal development industry for the better, for good. And he continues to make a difference by honing his efforts on proactive and humanistic recruiting strategies, development, and retention. Over the years, Steve has consistently shared his expertise with countless colleagues, associates, and fellow partners. He's also engaged with leadership teams at Starbucks, Whirlpool, Coca-Cola, Cisco Systems, Miller, Walgreens, amongst many others. And in addition, he frequently contributes to leading publications regarding entrepreneurship, recruiting strategies, and to strengthen professional leaderships. Steve founded Qualigence International, the largest recruitment research firm in the U.S. in 1999, and due to the firm's explosive growth, was named the top 50 companies to watch, which is a heck of an accomplishment. So, Steve, thanks for coming back, man. I'm really glad you could join me again today.
Glad to be here. I was waiting for you to get done with that introduction because it just kept going on and on and on. I think we need to cut that down next time, Ty.
There was complicated words in there too. Like it needs to just be one or two syllables, and that would be good. But then we get into
for both of us.
Yeah,
we're on the same page. It must have been my team that sent that to you because that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's just we'll work on it. You know, the third time around we'll get better, and it'll just be like a 5-word intro.
No, perfect.
Hey, thanks for coming back, man. I appreciate you cutting the time. You just had so much great stuff. I asked you last time to come back, and I'm really glad you took me up on it, and we're able to carve out some time to meet with me again.
Yeah, we had a great conversation. So anything that we can share, anything that I can do to help your listeners, your watchers, that'd be fantastic.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad you could be here. So let's start from the beginning. Now, remind everybody, for those that didn't hear the last episode, which if they didn't, let's admit that's shameful, but how did you find your passion? How did you kind of find what you love to get to where you are today?
You know, so I was on the opposite side, right? So I'm an architect by education. That's what I went to school for. You know, I'm a creative kind of guy. I love to create stuff, design stuff, right? But I ended up in a position where I didn't like sit behind a drawing board any longer because I'm a little older, right? So back in the day, it wasn't all computer. It was all by hand, but I couldn't do it any longer. So I went down the sales route, and sales led me to leadership. Leadership led me to what? Attracting and retaining people. And I had to figure out how to do it, and ultimately saw that the industry was so screwed up back then that I figured there's a better way to do this. And ultimately in the early 90s, 92, I went off and started, and I got into the business of people, got into the business of talent, got into the business of development, got into the business of entrepreneurship. And then here we are, 20 some years later, still doing it and going strong.
That's awesome, man. It's a heck of an accomplishment. What do you think, in doing what you do and getting to this point, what have you found is kind of like your superpower, the thing that you're just really, truly, naturally awesome at?
Well, I mean, a big part of it is, for me personally, is teaching. I love to teach others what to do based on the mistakes I've made, right? So I don't teach from theory. I teach from practical. I've been there. I messed it up. I screwed up an employee. I've messed up the whole initiative, whatever we were trying to do. And then to look at it from the opposite side and say, all right, how do I not do this again? How do I not ruin another employee?
Well, and it's powerful you say that, because Warren Buffett has one of my favorite quotes that I can't remember, which probably should be one of my favorites if I can't remember it. But it really touches on the fact that, it's good to learn from your mistakes. It's even better to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you could be here, because what you've done and what you've built is based on your experiences and obviously the people you've helped and their combined experiences as well. But what's one of the craziest things you've seen in your industry since you've been in it over the last 20 years?
Well, I mean, think about the primary piece of the business. So we're all about recruiting people. That's the first part, because you can't retain them if you don't have them in the first place.
Right.
And this industry is notorious for silver bullet syndrome, right? So this is the one way to recruit everybody. This is the one tool to use to attract everybody, to retain everybody, to develop everybody, and so forth. I don't know what it is. All my HR friends and everybody, we all get stuck on this. And I've seen it repeat itself 20 years, every year. It's some new tool, it's some new theory, it's some new thing, and that's going to solve all of our people problems. No, it's not. It's got to be something bigger, broader, and larger than that. And then we've got to be willing to shift, of course. But there is no one tool when you're talking about people, Ty. People change. Their motivations change. Everything about them changes.
Yeah. And it's very, very, very true. And it's kind of progressed a lot in the last 20 years, right? I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen along this line of, because technology's really changed. So what are these things that technology-wise, how's that even kind of changed and disrupted things from the last 20 years?
Well, it's a pro and a con, right? So let's think about professional hiring for a second. You got a tool like LinkedIn, right? Back when I got into the business, you had a Rolodex, you had a phone book. That's how you actually reached out to people. Remember the days of fax machines? I mean, so that's how far we go back, right? But now think about it. You can access a big group of people that are on LinkedIn. Now, that's the good thing. The bad thing is everybody has access to LinkedIn. So if you're trying to identify talent for your business, Ty, and the other organization that competes with you is trying to identify for their business, you have access to the same people. That's not necessarily a great thing because your competition is higher. So access bigger, great, competition higher. So now it becomes, how do you engage with these people? The differentiation is, how do you establish that relationship? Our tendency now is to do everything via our fingers on the keyboard, everything. Certain demographics, certain ages, they like that stuff. Right. Others that still make up a big part of the workforce, they don't like that stuff, but we get caught up in, well, everything's got to be done on my keyboard. This is now my holy grail. Not necessarily. You got to be really careful.
Well, when it comes to getting them then, LinkedIn, and everybody has access to the same ones. I mean, is there a money amount that you think should be committed to getting a new hire?
In terms of a fee?
I mean, yeah. I mean, how much should you pay, right? Because Indeed costs money to run ads on LinkedIn costs money, Craigslist. So how much do you think a company or organization should commit to get a new hire in the door?
Well, so it depends on how you look at it. Do you build the function internally so that you can ultimately drive your costs down, or do you outsource it all, right? If you outsource it all, you can get mass hiring down to $400 or $500 a hire. Mass hiring. Now, if you're hiring 2, 3, 4, 5 people, you're not going to be able to do that, and the internal function can't sustain it. So you really got to go external in those cases, and of course, your cost per hire is going to go up. So it really depends on where you are in the cycle and what you're actually trying to accomplish, because it can go from a few $100 to you can see fees into the hundreds of thousands of dollars for one person.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're hiring headhunters and those type of things, like what you're saying, if you're outsourcing it out. Well,
no question.
What do you think is the best hiring process? And by this, I mean, for example, what we do is we send applicants we're interested in a 2-question email, because that just filters people out right away. And then we do a pre-interview, and that filters people out. And then we kind of get to the smaller pool of employees. What have you found is the best process to go through to rule out as many people early as you can to get to the real applicants?
So there's again, to everything, there's a plus and a minus, right? Whether it's technology or anything else. There's some really great things about pre-assessment or asking a few questions up front. If they're really interested, well, they'll respond to me. Now, I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a second time, right? So if you send me those 2 questions, but your competitor down the street doesn't, and they engage with me person one-on-one right off the bat, am I going to answer your 2 questions? Am I going to respond to you? Or am I going to be more apt to respond to the other person who reached out to me? So there is a pro and a con here, right? Yes, you're going to filter it down, but are you always necessarily filtering out the people that are, well, they didn't respond, so they must be lazy? Not really. It's a competitive market out there, so we've got to be really careful about everything we do in the entire process. Make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense.
So there's a plus and a minus on every side, right? It depends on the level of position too. The lower the position you go, the more kind of screening out you need to do, because you're going to have volumes of applications.
Right.
The higher up the chain you go, the more professional the position. Be careful, because you could turn people off because they don't have to do it elsewhere.
Makes sense. Makes a bunch of sense.
Yeah, so be careful.
What do you find in an interview? Because like you said, it starts at the beginning, right? It starts in the acquiring of a team member. So what do you think things that should be asked or done in an interview? Because, everybody lies in interviews, right? So how do you get through that to get to the real person, to try to make sure that you're doing the right thing in the interview, to kind of make sure that you're bringing in somebody that's a good cultural fit to the organization?
So you said something interesting. Everybody lies in your interview. I would say everybody stretches the truth. Some lie blatantly, but I do think that the common nature of man or woman is to say, yeah, I did a little more than what I really should have said I did, or I was more involved than that's absolutely so true. But let's take a step back, because to recruit the right way ties right into retention, right? Because just because you get them in the door doesn't mean you'll keep them, right? So we've got to do a few things up front in this recruiting process. We talked a little bit about this in the last session, right? Is how do we structure the conversation? What do we look for? What are the areas we focus on? But we missed one last time. When we did this last time, Ty, we went through the core four. Remember the core four?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. So we've been testing something that I didn't bring up because we wanted to have some additional numbers around it. And it's now this process that we call the results-based interviewing. So you hear things like behavioral-based interviewing, competency-based interviewing, and I mentioned both of those last time. But the one thing that we miss, that we have found that makes a big difference and starts to eliminate some of the crap, is this process called results-based interviewing. And it's kind of changing it upside down. Remember, what we talked about is what we're really good at is interviewing people for skill, right? Can you do a function? But we really don't interview for all those other things, which is 90% of the time why we fire somebody. Motivation, communication, people call them soft skills, right? So how do you do all that? So I'm going to flip it on you, and I'm going to change the core four a little bit, because part of it is evolving, right?
Right.
So instead of getting into competency and skills, I'm going to start with what I call this idea of objectives and really understanding the capability of a candidate to produce. Now, most people who have either been in a leadership role or an HR role understand what behavioral-based interviewing is. Fair?
True.
So the idea behind it is, if they behaved a certain way in the past, there's a high correlation, a high likelihood they're going to do the same thing again in the future for you.
Right.
It makes sense, and the statistics show over 50 years this is the case. The same goes to what I call results. Now think about this. Here's problem number one. When employers are looking for a candidate, often they can't even define the objectives of the position. Now let me explain this. So you'll say, well, it's in the job description. The objective is to drive more sales and take care of our customer. That's not specific, Ty, at all.
Right.
Think about objectives, and there's a STAR methodology. There's a number of acronyms around it, but it's got to be measurable. It's got to be a KPI, right? So a key performance indicator, and it's got to be measurable, specific, and achievable. So if you go to your candidate and you say, here are the 3 objectives of the role. You need to achieve A, which is measured this way. You need to achieve B, which is measured this way, and C, which is measured this way. Now, give me an example of the situation that most closely resembles it, how you got there, what was your role, what did you do, and so forth. So we begin with specific results. Now, what's the difference? Now, let's think about it. As the employer, first, you have to now change your mindset. It's not just these general things we want to accomplish. I need to be specific about what they need to do.
Right.
How we're going to measure it. What's expected? How many job descriptions do you see that say that?
None.
But changing it to a results-based job description makes you me, anybody else as the employer, really think about what you're going to measure them against. Plus, it gives the candidate a better understanding of what's expected. So there's not ambiguity later around, did they do the job? Did they not do the job? Start there. Start with the objectives, the results. Have they achieved the results? That's different.
So give me an example of how that works to kind of put that into a job where you're basically coming in and saying, here's the results, here's the end goal of what we're looking for.
Yeah. So
I think it's typical of an explanation to say, here's what we want you to do in the position. But it's not typical to say, here's the result we want you to get.
That's absolutely the case. And it's mind-boggling why we haven't done that all this time. So I was talking to a client earlier this morning, and she's new to this process of results-based interviewing. We've trained her around the skills-based and the competency-based and figuring all that stuff out. But really it came down to, okay, she's got to think about it differently. She needed it to add a developer to staff, right? Technology pro. They have a lot of legacy stuff. They are trying to get into some new technologies and so on, which is already an issue. But then I had to make her really think, and she's the COO of the organization. What does success look like? What are the 3 primary things you're trying to accomplish here? Number 1, we want to move all of these legacy systems, and she had a list, onto a new platform by December 31st. Measurable? Is it attainable? Now you can go back to a candidate and say, give me a situation where you've taken legacy systems and put them on a new platform. How did you do it? What was your involvement? What was the cost? What were the roadblocks? What were all the issues? It starts off a whole different conversation, and it sets expectations. This is where we need to be. Number 2, we're spending X amount of dollars in third-party technology services. We need to reduce that by at least 40% by July. Measurable. Give me an example of maybe where you've had something close to that. Doesn't need to be exact. But again, it's setting the bar. Objective, how'd you get there? This is what we expect. And in 6 months in July, we know, did you do the job or not? There is no question. On December 31st, we know, did you do the job or not? There is no question. It makes so much common sense, Ty. I don't know why we haven't been doing it all this time.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, like you said, it's just that simple switch between here's what you're going to be doing to here's the result we want you to get. And they're coming in with clear expectations.
Yeah.
So then when they're on board, they know immediately, even from the interview, exactly what they're expected to do, timelines, how it's going to be measured. I mean, you talk about coming in with completely crystal clear expectations.
So, but not everybody thinks about it that way. I was with a senior vice president of another large organization, financial services, here in Michigan, which is where I'm headquartered. And I said, what are the objectives of the role? And he kind of got flustered. And this is a guy that's been doing this a long time. He says, I don't like your line of questioning. I said, what are you talking about? He says, didn't you read the job description? I said, yeah, but there's not one objective in the job description. Everything is about, well, this is your duties. Duties are different than the current situation and the objectives you need. So it took me an hour to finally get to a point where we had 3 concrete objectives that he had in his head, but couldn't communicate it. So it couldn't be communicated to a candidate, so you can't recruit against it, and you can't set expectations for development to get that person there.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
It is.
So,
And I found that, Stephen, just about everything in a company, you know, how easy it is to get caught up in a process and completely lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish, and how when you focus on the end goal and work backwards, it provides crystal clear clarity in almost any situation.
that is so true. Reverse engineering.
Right.
You want to get here. What are some of the ways to get there? What needs to be accomplished to get there? That's what the team needs to understand, because it's usually, as an entrepreneurs, it's in our head. We
Right.
kind of got it, but there's a lot of ambiguity when we deliver it to our teams, and then they're looking around going, Ty, I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not. I have no idea. And what happens, they have a bad day, somebody else comes in, swoops in, steals them, and you've lost them. Because they don't even know, they can't even measure themselves based on the lack of information we give them around objectives.
So it's astonishing. Now that you say that, I feel dumb. You know?
As I said, I learned this by doing it. I've messed it up too many times.
I just need to precept and follow you around to see all your mistakes and avoids. So what are the things when you're talking to somebody else, when you're bringing them in, what are the things? Should you be looking at their social media page? Should you be paying attention to what they're wearing to an interview? You know, these little things, do they add up? Are they to be ignored? I mean, what's your thoughts on all this?
So I'm going to give you the Steve answer, then I'm going to give you the politically correct answer. Okay. So the Steve answer is, I look at everything. You know, I look in the full totality of, I want to see somebody's social profile, but I have to take it with a grain of salt. Personal social profile like Facebook is meant to be personal, is fun, is all of that stuff. It's not business like you and I that would necessarily use it for. So if you think it should all be professional, don't even look at it. It makes no sense, right? Same with Twitter, Instagram. You look at any of that stuff, you've got to have the lens on. It's personal, it's friends, it's relationships. It's not business. It's not. Dress, now think about how dress has evolved. You and I are wearing basically the same color shirt. We're pretty casual, are we not?
You copied me, by the way.
I did. I looked at you first today to see what you were wearing. But think about, there was a period 6 years ago, you wouldn't catch me without a tie.
Right.
Now, you get in front of a client, yeah, am I going to dress up? Sure. But think about technology, folks. I can't tell you the last time I saw a really great software developer wear a suit. I don't even think they own one. So you got to, should they be a little bit more professional when coming in for an interview? Absolutely. You got to take that into consideration. If they come in with cutoffs and flip-flops for an interview, I'm probably done. I'm probably done. But they may not have much more than jeans or khakis. Is that cool? Sure. I mean, again, it's a different position. CEO of my business? Probably not. I'm probably going to expect something a little bit more. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt when you're interviewing.
So when you get them in the door, and we talked a lot about bringing them in the door before, but what are some things that you found are the best ways to retain top talent?
So let's first go back to what we were just talking about around this idea of objectives. And the reason that I bring it up, so there's two complaints that come up with candidates as they're leaving, right? So a lot of companies do exit interviews, right? So when the person resigns, they sit down with HR and HR says, tell me why you're leaving. Studies are shown that it doesn't give you the reality of what's really going on. So they may say something like, it doesn't pay enough. What they're really saying is, you haven't paid me enough to put up with the BS of my boss. So you got to be careful about, what it's worth. So you've got to understand it. But if you go back to the objectives, that's the number one complaint. I'm not even sure I know if I'm doing a good job or if I'm not doing a good job. I don't know what success looks like here because nobody's identified what success looks like here. That's number one complaint. So that's why we go to the results-based interviewing. Number two, nobody told me what the real roadblocks are going to be at this organization. So we want to hide it from them in the beginning. In an interview, we're told, don't tell them about the problems that we have. Don't tell them about the roadblocks they're going to stumble in to get their job done. And then they get in there, and a year later, they're like, well, nobody told me that we had to do this. Nobody told me it was going to be this hard. Right. Whereas if it's brought up in the beginning, and even if it gets worse for a period of time, the expectation is, I got to deal with this roadblock, this major issue. Those are two big things on the front end that ultimately impact the pre-18-month turnover. Because there's pre and post, right? So pre-18-month turnover. Now, if you get into the post-18-month turnover, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, there's still some of the objective thing, because that should be an ongoing thing every year, set your objectives and so forth. And now you got to start helping them personally develop, because even an individual contributor doesn't, for 90% of people don't want to be doing the same thing over and over and over for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Especially not today. Right. So what's my career path thing? How do you stretch me? Doesn't mean I have to change roles, but even in my role, you can stretch me. So a lot of these candidates are like, I've outgrown them. The role, I've outgrown it. So somebody else comes along, boom, I'm gone.
So you think, part of the retention then is keeping them challenged.
Yeah.
But you don't think it's a good idea to challenge them by them not having any idea what they're supposed to be doing or how to measure it.
You got to have, yeah. I mean, what's the point of saying go do when I can't tell you what it means to be successful in that? So there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, figure out how to get there, but at least you got to be able to say, this is where you got to get to. You've got to get to this point. Some people are resilient, don't even need the direction. They'll figure it out. That's cool. But even those people, without knowing where they're going, it's like a flare, right? They're really, really, really hot. They do fantastic. And then they ultimately start to fizzle out. And the company's like, they were an awesome performer. What the heck happened? It must be something in their personal life. Not sometimes, yeah. But often it's because we stop challenging them. We just want them to keep being a flare. And we're not giving them the ammunition or the fuel to keep being that flare.
Well, what kind of feedback loop or, review process? I mean, how do you do this? How do you get the feedback from them to know? Because like you said, they're going to lie or stretch the truth on exit interviews. So should you even do those? And what do you do things before they exit to open up communication so they can communicate these kind of things?
So I would never say don't do an exit interview because you still get some trend information out of exit interviews. What we have found is that there's we don't do it, but there's third-party organizations that do it for you. People have a tendency to be more open to a third party than they are to somebody that they're just walking away from, right? So I think you need to keep doing that. But you mentioned something, is it the review process? The days of the annual review, Ty, I think are numbered. Here's what happens. Think about the process of an annual review. And we did it for years. Our clients still, many of them still do. We're talking Fortune 100 companies, right? But think about it. You wait all year long, you get your annual review, and then you're shocked at the way that you're rated potentially. But you didn't even have objectives in the first place. Okay, so that's number one. It's very different. Now you're being reactive. The goal of leadership is to continually develop people. Would you say?
Absolutely.
Okay. And everybody's at a different point, right? Not everybody needs the exact same development, same hand holding, all that stuff. Agreed?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the only way to figure this out is by having ongoing conversation, whether it's a once a month, one-on-one, or something along those lines with your reports, and then your reports do it with their reports. But it's not this, hey, how you doing? That's what happens in a lot of these one-on-ones, because you sit in on them and they're like, how you doing? There's like, why are you wasting my hour of time? Start with some defined questions. What are you trying to figure out in a one-on-one or a review? Aside from just telling them where you think they are, what are we trying to do, Ty?
Well, we're ultimately trying to figure out, if they're happy and if they're producing at the level of the expectation of the organization.
Are they happy? Why are they happy? Why are they not happy?
Right.
Not just why are they not happy and jumping in on that, but why are they happy? What do they like? What do they don't like? So, but we have we don't ask it the right way. We have these conversations around, how you doing? You happy? It's like, who's going to say to their boss, unless you have a really, really great relationship, and this is how you build it, no, I'm really not happy. It's different if you have a prescription of questions like, what's working for you, Ty? What's not working for you? Why is that not working for you? What do you feel is missing, and that's why it's not working for you? What have you, Ty, done to overcome it? How can I help you? What are you going to do next? What can I do for you next? It's a very different series of questions.
Sure.
And by the end of that discussion, you now have a game plan. So when you meet the next month or 3 weeks later, whatever it is, it's a follow-up. Did you do it? Did you not do it? And then going through those questions again. You don't need an annual review at that point because you're reviewing every 30 days and you're pushing them forward, not just reacting after 12 months. And the last thing, really what you're reviewing them on is what happened in the last 30 days.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of your questions are even really relating to roadblocks. What is in your way that needs to be removed for you to perform at a higher level?
And that's what we miss. We think everything's hunky-dory. You can't just say, are you happy? You've got to really get into the nuts and bolts of, what's really going on. And instead of saying, are you happy? It's what's working. Let's talk about the great stuff. What's not working? Why is it not working? Why do you feel it's not working? Again, it's not only are you focusing on the facts here, you're focusing on some of the emotion around it. And most people don't leave because of the facts. They deal because of the emotion that it creates. I hate to say it, that's how we are as humans. The emotion will drive us out or keep us before the facts of compensation or a title or something else.
What do you think? Is this going to change with, millennials or the new, round of people that are coming into the workforce? So do you think things change, and how does that change or disrupt at all this hiring and retention process that we have?
It's an awesome question, because let's think of the stereotype of millennials. I hate to say it, it's pretty negative, right? They're lazy. They don't want to work, blah, 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 blah. I completely disagree with that. I don't think as leaders, we know what to do with them because we're not asking them the right questions in the first place, right? We're not challenging. They want to be challenged in a very different way. Their expectations are they need to understand the objectives. If they don't understand the objectives, they think the place is a mess and they're going to go someplace else. So there's a lot of turnover, but it's not, are there some issues with, like, I got 2 millennial kids, right? Very, very different, extremely different. One is a workaholic. One would love to go to school for the rest of her life. And I still love her. Obviously, right? Very different, the two of them. But there's some stereotypical things that are stereotypes because there's a little bit of truth. But the majority of it, I think, is we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to harness them. We're not asking the right questions. We are just not asking the right questions.
So it really comes down to giving that clear guidance, clearly what you're expected to produce. And I like that. And I like the idea of discussing the roadblocks and barriers they're going to face before they're even hired,
Yep.
because it almost even sets them up to start solving the problem of how to get past those barriers before they even walk in your door.
Well, actually, so let's go back for a second, because remember I said on the core four, I'm notorious for, there's four things. So I said the first thing to go after was the objectives, right? Define the objectives, three major objectives. The second thing that I go after is outcomes. So you're defining the objectives because you want to understand the outcome that that person had in a similar situation. So it's objectives and outcome is number one and number two, right? Number three is what we're just talking about, is this idea of obstacles. So you lay it out up front. Here's the obstacle you're going to have, Mr. or Mrs. Candidate, in order to hit the objective that we want you to hit. Give me an example of a situation where you had a similar obstacle. What'd you do? Right? That's how the conversation starts. So now you've got objectives, you've got the outcome that they had, now you've got the obstacle, and the reason you ask that is then to turn it into approach. So after you get an example of the candidate of dealing with a similar obstacle, what would their approach be if they came and worked for you? Now you get to hear them think out loud. Well, I do this. I do this. I do this. Now you've got some real reasoning in a real world situation off the cuff. How would they approach it? Then I go into the rest of the stuff. Do you have the skills? Do you have the competencies? Do you fit my culture? And so on. Because if you can't get past this piece, there's no point in continuing.
Yeah. It's very true. And so much of this rings true to just be exact examples. Like I hired somebody that was a horrible cultural fit. I mean, my team they almost took me out.
Really?
How bad it was. And so now we try to hire based on culture, right? But like you said, when we start with our core values and create questions based on our core values, knowing that our goal is to get somebody that's a cultural fit, well, then ask them culturally related questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the easiest way. So it's just what you're saying is just brilliant, which I'm sure you know because you said it, but it's just brilliant because if you start with the end in mind and work backwards, then you're asking questions and the whole interview is designed to get to the answers to those questions before you're even
And what you just said is so I'm starting with the end, the objectives of the role. And you said start with the end in mind and back into it. So we're spending all of our time up front. Can we have you? What's the closest you've come? How do you deal with those objectives, or the objectives and the roadblocks? And then ultimately, let's get into the cultural aspects. And we talked about that in last session around the core four profile, really
Right.
understanding, not only the competencies for the position, but really the cultural piece is competencies that fit your business, right? But let's back into all of that by starting with, can you accomplish the results? Do we even know the results we need in the first place? Most entrepreneurs can't even put it on paper. And I've got to really spend some time getting them to think about, oh my gosh, I need them to do A, B, C, and here's my KPI, here's my measurable. It's in your business plan. Break it down.
Yeah.
Share the wealth.
Well, what do you do about pay? Because pay raises to me is nerve wracking because I don't know how people value money is completely different based on who you talk to. So like when you get to that point, when it comes to perks, when it comes to incentives, another thing I've realized is that like apparently everybody's not incentivized by money. Didn't know that. Like some people like a day off versus more pay, which is crazy. So how do you figure this out? How do you know when to pay them, how to raise their pay to keep them happy without insulting them and to make sure the pay raises? How do you figure this whole minefield out?
So pay is an interesting thing because of what you said. Look, we all need money to live. Some of us are focused on, a certain amount, maybe or maybe not, but to other people, they don't live to work. They work to live, right? So when we give them a raise, we're sometimes using it like the carrot and the stick. It's this false motivation that, hey, if I give them a couple extra bucks, maybe they'll stay. Well, they might for 60 more days, but if there's other issues going on that we didn't uncover during our one-on-one around what's working, what's not, and so forth, if you do the one-on-ones correctly, take a step back, right? Because comp, we're saying it's all about the comp. It's not. Let's first uncover what drives the candidate through the questions we ask during the one-on-one. Because if they say, hey, one of my real problems is I've got a young child at home and I just don't spend enough time with them, maybe in lieu of comp, it is an extra couple of days of vacation. Now, it still costs as an entrepreneur or business money anyways.
Right.
But if they're saying, well, the extra money is great, but I really want this, and you force down the raise on them and you don't give them this, what's going to happen? They're gone. At some point, they're gone. So you have to have comp in a bucket of information around what are the drivers of this individual that reports to me or is on my team. Is comp really the driver, or is comp just solving a potential issue and I don't really know what the issue is first? Now, all things being equal, at that point, comp should be a very easy discussion to have. Here's where you are. Here's the value you bring to my organization. You hit these objectives or you have not. Think about this conversation. I want to raise, I want to raise, I want to raise. Great. Here was the 3 objectives for the year. Did you hit them? Nope. Do you deserve a raise? Right? It's an easy discussion. It all ties together, but we put them in different silos and we put them in different buckets. And it starts with understanding what the hell's the job supposed to do in the first place.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when I look at some of the things I wanted to talk to you about feedback loops and why people leave organizations and pay, it's all the same thing. It's all in exactly the bucket that you're talking about, that if you do these regular meetings, you get to know the employee, you understand what drives them, you understand what incentives to give them pay, you're getting the feedback from them in real time, you're going to be able to easily see if they're unhappy or if they're happy or what needs to be done to make them happy, the barriers they face that create and cause them stress. I mean, almost every single thing that I know of that causes an employee to leave basically is revealed in these regular sessions where you're asking them 5, 6 pretty basic, simple questions just to kind of get in their head and see where they are with trying to accomplish the goals.
Yeah. And that's, it's not rocket science. What we do is not rocket science, but we are in the people business. Everybody who owns a business, works for a business, has people reporting to them. It's about relationships. It's about people. You're not just managing a bunch of computers. So don't assume that you know what everybody's thinking. Ask the questions, build the relationship. The challenge in a big organization, Ty, is when you've got layers and layers of management, right? Because you've got to get this layer to do it, then the next layer to do it, and the next layer to do it. And often there's this big disconnect between what's at the top and what's at the bottom, and the bottom sometimes doesn't feel it. So it's important as the leaders to drive this methodology down, asking the questions and asking them in a pretty prescribed format. On one of our websites, we have what's called the Baker's Dozen questions. It's 13 questions. Ask the same 13 questions every time you meet in a different way. It is amazing what you will find out about people. Absolutely amazing. And they're simple questions, a few of which I already shared.
Yeah, and I love that concept as well, because that's one of the things I found is that, you ask the same people or same organization the same question multiple times, you always get multiple answers. It's staggering how true that is. As we kind of get ready to wrap up, what's one of the things that you think most entrepreneurs aren't doing right now that every single one of them should be doing?
Well, one is the way in which they interview, right? Entrepreneurs, and I'm one, you're one, we're notorious for going by our gut. And gut is important because it's why it makes a lot of us successful, right? But when it comes to people, we need to have a process. And entrepreneurs hate process. We don't like it because it puts us in a box, right? So I've given some direction without completely a box. That's absolutely critical. If you don't know the team that reports to you, if you can't define for me what drives them, what doesn't drive them, what's important to them, you don't know your team. If you get to know your team at that level, the entire dynamic of your organization will change because loyalty increases beyond anything you could ever expect. We don't do that well as entrepreneurs. Even I struggle with that, and yet I teach this stuff every day.
It's so true. I'm kind of laughing because I'm literally going through an interview process right now today. I mean, after our call, I have another interview, and yeah, you called me out.
And
I'm like that gut. Like, I'm like, I love this guy. I'm going to hire this guy. And then the next guy comes in. I'm like, I love that lady. I'm going to hire that lady. And it's just all based on gut versus, just actually having a really concrete system. It's hard. It's really hard.
It is.
To do. It is.
Think one of the challenges when you don't have certain objectives to measure against, right? So let's say you have your interview today, Todd, and you do love that person. Then tomorrow, and you do love that person. Now you got 3. Our natural tendency is to say, okay, I'm going to pick the best of the 3, right? So I'm going to pick this one over here, whoever that one happens to be. But we've never had something to compare all 3 against. Where's my bar for the objectives of the position? What if all 3 of them are under the bar? So you're picking the best of the worst, which I see happen every freaking day because nobody knows what the bar is because they haven't thought about it.
Yeah. What as we wrap up, and one last question, what's the action item? What's everybody listening? What's one thing that they should do right now to improve in the area of hiring and retention?
Well, I think education is the biggest thing, right? Understanding what it means to do this. And to that end, we've got an absolute ton of free resources. One of our companies is Recruitment Education Institute. It's for hiring leaders. It's for HR people, for entrepreneurs to really understand the stuff that I'm talking about, to actually understand what does it mean. There's a ton of free resources at recruitmentedu.com. If you take nothing else out of this thing, at least go there and download all the free stuff, look at all the free videos, because it gives you a lot of direction that you need on the stuff that we're talking about.
Love it. Man, thanks for spending the time to come back with me today. I mean, we dove into a bunch of stuff, and you've discovered stuff since last time we talked. So this has been really even more enlightening, I think, than the last time we met. It's been phenomenal.
And happy to be part of it. There's no point in learning this stuff and not helping others with it. I'd hate to see others make the same mistakes that we've made all these years, that people continue to make. Let's start changing the way we do this stuff and make happier employees that drive our businesses.
I love it. So everybody listen, make sure that you check out recruitmentedu.com. I will leave this in the show resources page. So that's recruitmentedu.com. Again, a very special thanks to Steve for coming on. And thank you all very much for taking the time to tune in. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.